is about creating a brave space to unpack what it means to be a man and spark new ideas to confront old and persistent problems. It's about growing, healing, being role models, and raising a healthier next generation of men. So yeah, I'm hosting today, but I'm only one small part of that team, like I said. So on the call today, I am joined by Barry from Pints at the Pack and Danica from SARC. And Barry is watching over the chat for us today, so he'll be able to answer questions you may have. So feel free to direct them to him or to the entire group within the chat as well. It's totally fine. I'd like to thank and acknowledge as well our guest speakers who are on the panel today. I'll give you kind of a more thorough introduction of them later. But we are joined by Dylan Rhys Howard, Akash Asif, Dennis Shinsky, and Mike Dunn. So thanks so much, guys, for being here. We really value, again, like your time and your sharing of your expertise and your experiences. But yeah, I'll get you all a very complete full bio of all our panelists later. So in terms of order of events for today, we are going to start with a little intro like I just did. I'm going to jump into a land acknowledgement, then I'm going to go over some very, very brief things about Zoom, and then we are going to screen the film. After the film, we're going to have a quick 5-minute break so folks can top themselves off with, more coffee or whatever it is you need. And then we will start our panel discussion promptly at 11. We do have some questions for our guests first, and then of course we'll take audience questions as well. And then we'll wrap up and let you get on with your Sunday. So I think my camera should work now. So we're finally going to start it. Oh, look there. Hello, everyone. So in terms of a land acknowledgement first, so as a settler on this land, like, perhaps many others here, when we are talking about issues around mental health and around suicide, it's super important to acknowledge that these issues disproportionately affect Indigenous people here in Canada and around the world. So it's crucial to recognize that, ongoing colonization and racism have contributed to and continue to contribute to intergenerational trauma. This has had lasting impacts on Indigenous people in Canada. And we all have a part to play in healing and reconciliation that's needed. So land acknowledgements, they're small, but they're a part of that. And there is, of course, much, much more work to be done. So I am joining you from Treaty 6 territory. I'm in Edmonton, as I said. Edmonton's also known as Amiskwichi-Waskahikan, and it is the traditional territory of the Cree, the Dene, the Saulteaux, the Nakota Sioux, and the Métis people. All right. In terms of housekeeping, you will notice cameras and mics are shut off for most folks, as the Zoom is in webinar format. Since it is in webinar format, you're also going to notice that there is both a chat box and a Q&A box. So 2 different boxes there where you can submit questions. And I would say, if you have questions or comments about the event itself, about, the organizations behind the event or whatever, throw it in the chat box. Or if you have comments, just generally throw them in the chat box. And like I said, Barry is watching over the chat and he'll be able to answer questions and kind of keep that conversation going. The Q&A box, I would say save that for questions that you want to ask the panelists specifically. And you can start putting questions in there at any point, while we're watching the film, or save it for during the panel discussion. If you do accidentally close out of Zoom, the same link that you used to get in initially should work to get you back in. Of course, we know Zoom, while being a great tool, can be a little treacherous. So I will drop Danica's email in the chat as well, so that if anyone does get shut out of Zoom and needs help, they can send her a direct email. Roger, I see your question there. The film is 45 minutes long, so it's not a super, super long one. So we will be watching that pretty quick here, and then we'll be done with time for a break and then panel at 11. All right, during the film screening, I am going to leave the Zoom open, though of course, like all mics and videos will be shut off, but this means you can actually continue to talk to people about the film while we watch it using the chat box in Zoom, if you choose to. If you're not a multitasker and you don't like doing that, don't have to. And I think with that, unless anyone else has any questions, you can feel free to pop them into the chat. But with that, I'm going to actually share this link with everybody, and you're going to be able to open the film using your own browser. So I would suggest if you've joined us from a phone today that you may want to find a computer because if I try to share my screen and stream it to all of you, the internet probably won't like that. So I'm going to share this link. And if folks want to make sure it opens up for you, this is the commercial-free version of the film, courtesy of Dylan. We could have sent you the CBC Gem stream for free, but you'd get annoying commercials. So this is the commercial-free version. And hopefully this makes sense to everybody. Everyone can start giving me like a yeah, a thumbs up or whatever in the chat. It's hard when I can't see you all. But Mike, were you able to open the link to the film? Did it work? Or Dylan or anyone else? Let me know. Give me a thumbs up. Excellent. Okay. Excellent. Okay. With that, I would say we can do like a countdown and kind of start the movie at the same time if everyone wants to be exactly on time with one another. And yeah, we'll see you all back here at 11 if you choose to leave the Zoom. But yeah, I'm gonna say 3, 2, 1. Let's hit play. So play. All right, I'll see you in a bit. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. Gonna get my camera working here in just a second, but while we figure out things on the tech side, oh, there we go. Yay, I will get us started here. So, yeah, hopefully everyone enjoyed the film, and yeah, please, like, holy cow, like, silent clap, I guess, because we're all over Zoom, but like silent clap for Dylan and Dennis and the folks who took part and who created it. So yeah, this is a rare pleasure to be able to screen a film and then be like, look, we have the people who made it and the people who are in it. it's pretty amazing. So yeah, welcome back. I'm just going to quickly kind of re-mention the Zoom features for this section of the event. And then I'll introduce our panelists a little more fully. So the panel portion is being recorded for SARC, and it's going to be posted afterwards on the Pints with the Pack Facebook page and SARC's social media channels. So if you do have to run out for any reason and you miss part of the panel, just know that you can catch up on it later. As well, again, please feel free to use the chat box to contribute to the conversation. We always love when people kind of continue the conversation kind of alongside of us. And then for the Q&A, please do use the Q&A box if you have a question that's specific for the panel. I think that is all. If anyone has any questions, I'm just going to check the chat here. I think we should be good. Awesome. So with that, I want to introduce our panelists. So first I have Akash Asif, who is joining us from the Calgary Center for Suicide Prevention. We actually met, when would it have been, 2019 in November, when we screened this film last time at the Globe Theatre in Calgary. I don't know if you remember, but it was like the weirdest wet snow all day. And it was just like we were swimming to get to the theater through the snow. But Akash graduated from the University of Calgary with a Bachelor of Science in Psychology and a Bachelor of Commerce in Petroleum Land Management. I don't know how you have so many degrees, my friend, but after graduating, he ran SupportWorks, a Calgary-based organization providing peer support to people dealing with mental health issues. In 2018, Akash completed a Master's of Public Policy at the University of Calgary's School of Public Policy, and shortly after joined the Calgary Center for Suicide Prevention. There, Akash is currently the External Relations Director, where he identifies and engages new and current audiences in the organization's mission, which is around reducing mental health stigma, as well as increasing awareness and uptake of suicide prevention training. So welcome, Akash. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Next, I have Dylan, and I want to be like Dylan and I go way back, but it's not true. We only met in like 2019 as well, but it feels like we go way back at this point. So Dylan Rhys Howard is a producer, a director, and editor from the Canadian Prairies, joining us today from Edmonton. Prior to his work with co-director Omar Muallim on Digging in the Dirt, the production we just watched, his short film Peak Oil was selected to be part of Telefilm Canada's Not Short on Talent program and screened at the Marché du Film Court at the Clermont-Ferrand International Short Film Festival in France. Thank God I speak French, or that would have been really hard. Peak Oil also received an Alberta Motion Picture Industries Association Rosie Award for Best Narrative Short and the National Screen Institute's A&E Short Filmmakers Award for Best Film. Dylan, if you have a link to Peak Oil, we should maybe send that to folks if they can still watch it. But anyway, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure. And yeah, certainly. Yeah, Omar suggested screening those two films together at one point. And obviously the pandemic kind of changed our plans for the screening tour we were hoping to do with this film. But yeah, thanks for bringing that up again. I will take that under advisement.
Thanks, Dylan. All right, also joined by Dennis, who probably needs no introduction at this point since you just saw Dennis in the film. But I think, yeah, just thank you so much, Dennis, for joining. So Dennis worked in trades and industry for 14 years with many different roles from laborer to supervisor. He transitioned out of oil and gas, as you have heard from the film, and into Grand Prairie Regional College to work towards getting accepted into the University of Calgary's social work program, which he successfully did, right? Now a fourth year social work student. So Dennis has worked and volunteered in the mental health field for over 7 years and has been helping people in recovery from addiction for over 8 years. Currently, Dennis works at a high school as a youth advocate and a First Nations Métis and Inuit liaison. He's passionate about helping people by sharing his lived experience to inspire hope and courage to change. Thanks so much, Dennis. Do you have anything to add as well? I feel like I got only a short snapshot.
Nice to be here. I almost have my degree. It'll be in springtime, and then I go into practicum. So by fall of this year, I should be a registered social worker and have my BSW, which
Congrats.
I've been working for a while, right? It seems like it's been a long journey.
Yeah.
A very rewarding one. So
yeah, totally. And 4 years is a long time. So congratulations. That's so exciting. That's awesome. And lastly, I've got my friend Mike Dunn, and we actually do go way back. It has been a journey. So Mike is an Alberta carpenter, writer, and artist joining us today from Calgary. So he's been a member of the United Brotherhood of Carpenters, Locals 1325 and 2103. Is that how I should be saying that? I'm not saying 2,100, anyway, 2103 since 2004. A staunch supporter of workers' rights and improving the lives of working people. Mike also, lived through the boom years and the subsequent busts in Alberta's, working oil and gas for 12 plus years, and has seen firsthand the effects of the kind of cycles of boom and bust in the oil industry on field level workers, their families, and on Alberta more generally. Do you have anything to add, Mike? I feel like it was a short intro as well.
I just want to thank you guys for doing this. This is outstanding. The film, I mean, I've known Chris Johnson since 2003. Before both of us were in the trades, we played guitars and jammed and had a little band in Fort Saskatchewan. Before either of us got into the trades. So seeing his story brought to life like that was kind of intense, but unfortunately not surprising.
Yep, and we're gonna have, I'm sure folks have so many similar stories, and that's, I feel like kind of one of the main benefits and the purpose really of the documentary is to be like, yep, these stories are not uncommon, so maybe we should talk about them. So thank you as well, Mike, for joining. All right, I have questions for all of you, of course. And I think I would like to start just chatting with Dylan and with Dennis a little bit about the film. Since it has been out for a while now, came out fall of 2019. And there's a couple social media channels that the film has that's kind of kept the conversation going. As well, you've done different events, you've talked on different panels, relating to the film. So generally, I guess maybe we'll start with Dylan. What's been the reaction to the film, and kind of what kind of feedback have you received?
Yeah, I think O and I were both incredibly happy with the reaction to the film. I mean, Omar, my co-director, is a journalist who's got a bit of a national reputation at this point. So he had a little bit more experience with publishing something that actually gets consumed en masse. But for me, this is the first film that I've made that really got seen and discussed widely. And I remember very directly listening to this panel discussion that Dennis and a few of the other subjects from the film were a part of on a call-in show called the Ryan Jesperson Show here in Edmonton. I don't think they're still running, but it was one of the most listened to, I think the most listened to sort of call-in talk radio show in Edmonton. And this is before the film even came out. It was a panel discussion, yeah, like I said, with Dennis, Omar, Chris, and Mike Smith from the film. And the outpouring of support for these guys and the number of people who are reaching out with stories about similar experiences was absolutely incredible. And even Ryan, the host, was trying to get emotional, and he said it was maybe the best show he'd been a part of. So that was pretty amazing because the whole reason I got into filmmaking in the first place was trying to offer something, to try and be of service to humanity in some way by either being vulnerable about something myself, which I think you can, for those of you who do check out the short film, I mean, that's a lot of what's on display there is a lot of the sort of questions about masculinity or things that I've really, don't like about myself, kind of putting them out there for everyone to see. So either being vulnerable about something myself, or in this case, providing a platform for other people to be vulnerable. And because I think it's through that vulnerability in filmmaking and storytelling that others are able to recognize that they're not alone. So this film continues to feel like a real success on that front, and incredibly validating, because this job is not always easy, and it gets even harder when you start stressing about whether this thing you're spending all your time and energy on really matters in the long run. And then personally, I feel like it's going to keep me accountable for the rest of my life. Sort of having made this film and talking so much of the talk, I kind of feel a sense of responsibility to walk the walk. So I feel like I feel like, I can't be one of these guys who drops dead at home, because they're experiencing chest pains and like just don't want to go to the hospital or something. Like I need to, I need to kind of like carry this torch of more positive masculinity, or try to anyway, for the rest of my life, because the irony would just be too much to bear, I guess.
Totally. I love that response, because we don't often think about, I suppose, the long-term effects of a creation on its artist. So I definitely value that perspective. And Dennis, what about for yourself? I know you've talked about the film a fair bit. Well, generally, what's the reaction been, or what has it meant to you to be able to share that story?
It's been overall, I would say, positive, and a lot of people identifying with the stories, with my story, and then the other stories within the film. I remember the Ryan Jesperson show, and it was pretty cool. And there were some people in there, saying that, we were messed up before we got into the oil field, And I remember, as far as negative, that was about the only thing I really heard out there. But I think whether we were or we weren't, this is happening, and I think people messed up, they get into it. It still doesn't take away from the fact that the environment itself is what is creating, a lot of the struggles that we go through. So we screened it in my social work class with social work students, and we invited the public, and we only had so much room. This was kind of pre-COVID, so right before that hit, and we weren't allowed social gatherings. And Dylan was there, and Glenn, part of the film, he was there, and we did a panel. Like, we just stood up in front of everybody, and the conversation that happened in that room with men was it was unbelievable, actually. And then I heard feedback from that, how they brought it home to their families, to their friends, and had more conversation. you know, to me, that is like, this is part of the solution, is talking about it and sorting through this stuff, unpacking it in a sense, right? So, you know, and I remember before we even started all this stuff, and Omar started talking to me about having Allie involved, and I remember she didn't want to do it. And then I said, well, what if we could help one person maybe not experience the same thing as what Dallin did, your son? And she said, if it helps one person, I'm in, you know? And I feel the same way. If we're helping one person, I'm in, you know? But I know that we're helping more than one person. You know, and I know with the stigma with this stuff is like, yeah, sometimes it's a little bit harder for the people involved to talk about it. But, you know, I think that that's part of the solution. I said it right at the end, you know, we all have feelings and emotions. And so it's been a positive experience throughout. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, that's so good to hear. I'm glad. And I'm sure your class was like, whoa. But again, it sort of get like, right, like it's a powerful film, but it gives people permission to talk about things that, again, like lots of people have experienced. So we just need to give voice to that. And
I did some psychology classes as well, and a couple little ones and showings, and shared it on social media for my friends and family and stuff. And yeah, I've had random messages from people all over, just congratulating me, and, you know, talking about courage and how brave I am and all these things, right? And so that was really nice as well. And a lady cornered me in Safeway once, and she said, "You're that guy." I was like, which guy are you talking about?
like, what did I do?
the guy from the film, the digging in the dirt thing. I'm like, yeah, that's me. So I wasn't sure if it was from my past or recently when she says you're that guy. So
good to get the clarification for sure. Oh, that's awesome though. I mean, strange encounters in grocery stores aside, I mean, it's nice when you've been given so much positive feedback for this, because it does take courage. And so, yeah, I mean, thank you, ultimately. Okay, something else. This one, I'll kind of kick it over to Akash to kind of start us off talking about this, but I do want others to kind of weigh in. So we talk about preventing suicide a lot, and there has been like a big focus on kind of knowing and spotting the signs, which is definitely important. But I'm curious, what might be some preventative measures we can take long before, you know, signs might develop, in order to prevent suicide in workplaces?
Yeah, well, thank you. That's definitely a good question. I guess in my opinion, I mean, one of the best suicide preventative measures that can be taken involves kind of that positive, supportive, and close relationships you have with kind of your family, friends, and coworkers, right? So, I mean, to me, like relationships provide a safety net when someone is thinking about suicide. And because those people are there to offer help and to be asked for help, right? So you have that connection with individuals. So, and really everybody, I think it's important to be valued and kind of have that sense of purpose and belonging is kind of why I think it's really important to have those relationships. I mean, when it comes down to preventative measures, there isn't a ton out there with suicide because suicide is complex because people are complex, right? So uh, aren't ton, but I'll kind of briefly maybe mention the 4 best practices in suicide prevention according to the World Health Organization. So, I mean, the first one is open and easy access to mental health care, right? So making sure that we have things available. So if someone requires assistance or they just know that things are available, right? So having those adequate supports available is kind of the first thing. And the kind of the second piece that I'll kind of mention is kind of restriction of lethal means, right? So this is a little bit more focused on policy and some of the pieces that government can focus on. And it's kind of that focuses on things like gun control and pesticide control, as well as adding barriers to bridges and high-rise buildings. So these are policies that the government can kind of leverage and complete that that are a lot easier to kind of control some of these potential risk factors that exist. You also have kind of responsible media reporting. So when it comes down to preventative measures, I mean, just appropriate guidelines, right? So they exist out there. So make sure that you're not glamorizing or sensationalizing a suicide, as well as a lot of other guidelines that I think reporting can take as well. And lastly is education, right? So This is something that we are involved with the Center for Suicide Prevention as we equip people to be able to help those who are having thoughts and feelings around suicide. And education is not just training, it also includes kind of that surveillance pieces and those research pieces with statistics. So those are kind of the four: opening easy access to mental health care, restriction of lethal means, responsible media reporting, and education. I mean, besides that, I mean, other things that we can do is very similar to what you hear about positive mental health and having good self-esteem rates. So exercising, sensible diets, and participating in those kind of self-care activities. I think all of these kind of combine to those preventative measures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking when you mentioned education, like it is the training of spot the signs, right? That's part of it, but it's beyond that when it comes to, you know, myth busting for like larger society. Like folks, unfortunately, we still have a ton of myths about, you know, suicide or mental health, and we should be busting those myths for as many folks as possible so that we all kind of like understand the issue a little bit better. So yeah, I appreciate your center's work in that respect as well. Dennis, I don't know if you have anything to add now from kind of your background as a mental health advocate and now as a, you know, up and coming social worker, and just your experiences in general. Prevention, you know, before spotting the signs, what can we do?
I think a proactive approach is like creating those environments like I talked about where, you know, because it's kind of a subculture within our culture, some of the trades and industry stuff like oil and gas and construction and you know, those labor kind of intensive jobs dominated by males, is like creating an environment that people can check in. You can talk about it rather than this closed off, I need to do this on my own, I can't share what I'm going through, that type of stuff. And I think leadership is another big piece within that, is just like, what are our leaders, our mentors, our employers, our management doing? How are they, do they have this open, you know, open door policy? I like it that they say it all the time. Our doors open, stop in any time, but you need to say more than that. You need to create an environment where you're checking in with each other. You know, Mates in Construction talks about it in the documentary, is like they created like a buddy system, and you know, you check in with each other. There's a spot, you know, on safety meetings now and different things, and human resources and, you know, employee assistance programs. Like, it's about accessing the stuff, but it's also about creating it so people can access it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then all the other pieces that Akash talked to is like, that's another part of it. I think it's within that, they're all kind of interconnected, right? And you know, I think that proactive approach and lifting the stigma would be, you know, I don't know, maybe we're getting there. I noticed the change when I was kind of leaving the oil field, is like there was more talk about it. Mental health is becoming, you know, more and more of a priority because businesses, corporations are losing people, not just to suicide, but to, because they're overwhelmed, they're overworked, they're stressed, like all of this stuff, and they're not being able to manage that, right? So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like there's a whole conversation about cost in terms of, you know, folks taking leave, you know, from burnout, from all sorts of things.
yeah.
And when you can put a number on it, it's like we hope that, you know, organizations will look at that and be like, ooh, yeah, that's a drain. We should stop that drain.
There's out there for it, for
right?
sure. And if you show them the numbers, sometimes that speaks louder than talking about, you know,
the human cost, you know.
I know it's sad,
Yeah.
but it's just true. You show them numbers on the millions up to billions that it costs overall in North America, the cost of, you know, losing somebody, whether it's a medical leave or leave of absence or whatever it is, right? So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
And I like that you brought up as well that the program Mates in Construction, because it actually reminds me of the Calgary Center for Suicide's Buddy Up campaign. And I was curious, I know I want to get to Mike too, and I'm just like, but Akash, this is the perfect moment for you to just tell us about Buddy Up. So Mike, I'm coming to you next, but Akash, tell us about Buddy Up.
Awesome. No, thank you. Yeah. So exactly. I think it's a great segue. So the Buddy Up campaign that's created by the Center for Suicide Prevention it takes its inspiration from the Masons construction program. So you guys saw that in the movie. You saw Jorgen kind of give a little bit of a spiel there within the documentary there. So I very closely work with Jorgen when we're creating this campaign, and it's focused on men and suicide prevention. And the premise of the campaign is to really promote authentic conversation among men and their buddies. So Buddy Up focuses on help offering behavior, which means that instead of focusing on the individual who's struggling, the campaign targets the community and friends of this individual. So who are the people around them, right? So it encourages men to pay attention to their buddies and be comfortable enough to initiate, I guess, and make a conversation if they are worried about them. So it has kind of two components. First is kind of a visual component with various cartoon-like characters. I mean, you got your elderly Jim character, and then you got Steve as a construction worker, and so on. And what the purpose of those is to really create the campaign to be more approachable, and then hopefully you see some of these pictures and these stories, and you may be able to resonate with them. So that's kind of that first component of it. And then the second component is a 4-step guide on how men can help their buddies. So a lot of guys, this campaign was derived from guys. We've had over 60 guys being involved, and a lot of them said, I'm willing to help, I just don't know how to. So that's where the guide was created. So I will throw out a little bit of a plug here, but the next annual Buddy Up campaign is in June of 2021 here. So it'll be kind of an annual thing. It'll be all month long. We'll be highlighting men's suicide and how it can be prevented. And so we are looking for individuals and groups. So that group can be maybe your hockey team, it could be your church group, or you could be your company to sign up as champions, which you can do so by visiting www.buddyup.ca. So
Which I dropped into the chat for anyone who's interested.
Thank you. But yes, we are looking for champions. We'd love for you to have you guys be involved as well.
Next Gen Men, we were champions of the campaign last time around. And yeah, I mean, I hope, again, because one of the comments from, I think it was Dr. Bilsker, did I say that properly, Dylan? You can give me a thumbs up. Dr. Bilsker, yeah, had mentioned men don't have the tools always to have the conversation. So here it is. Buddy Up is just like, here's the tools. I know there's others that have been created by like Movember, for example. They created like an interactive tool that kind of like sort of just models how to have conversations via chat. It's really interesting, which I will also include in a post-event email so folks can check out all of these different resources that we talk about. Yeah, Mike, I'm coming to you, buddy, because I am thinking about sort of workplaces and the environments, and yeah, like whether or how much things have changed. You know, as the film kind of demonstrates, we're looking at, you know, when it comes to trades, especially like really kind of hyper masculine environments where it's definitely not encouraged to, you know, express emotions sometimes or ask for help. But that can lead to a lot of problems, as we've seen. So I'm curious, Mike, work environments now, you know, you're in the trades right now. How has it changed, or has it changed? What would you say?
It has here and there. I recall last year, oh, pardon me, we're in 2021 now.
Who even knows anymore?
In late 2019, I was working a job on a high rise, and in a safety meeting, they brought it up. They brought up supports for mental health, mostly that it ran through our union hall. I was already aware because I had used it earlier in the year, finally. After several instances of anxiety over the years, I kind of hit a wall one morning, and there part of the job site culture is you still don't show that kind of vulnerability or that kind of weakness around your crew, because it can undermine confidence in each other's ability to do the job safely around each other. And you end, whether you like it or not, it's still part of the culture that you'll end up carrying that around for a while. But that's the one time I've ever had a company address it en masse. And I mean, that job in particular was in the city. There wasn't the added stress of isolation, the added stress of the distance from your family and friends and your supportive relationships. So I haven't been in the oil and gas industry since this time last year, but it wasn't a conversation then, although with one particular workmate, I would have had we had the conversation several times that revolved more around addiction, because he was an addict, and the company had helped him get clean to keep him because he was a valued guy. And I'm not sure that they do that for just anybody. In my experience, they don't, but they did for him. And so he was well on the path to recovery.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a little discouraging to hear how much it maybe hasn't shifted, but interesting to see kind of where it's been at from your experience. I'm picking up on what you said as well about, you know, disclosing, you know, instances of like mental health struggles can lead to like distrust of your teammates towards you. And I think that's a really interesting piece to kind of hone in on, because you know, one of my questions here as well is kind of about flipping the script. And I think like Dan or Dr. Bilsker talked about that in the film as well. Like, you know, we can frame this as getting the tools. We can also frame potentially the risk or the sense of mistrust for like speaking up as like, well, wouldn't it be worse if you didn't speak up and then end up in a situation where safety was more of a risk because someone actually they shouldn't have been on the job site because of how the way that they were not in a good place, you know what I mean? So I think it's really interesting, and I have this kind of question about flipping the script, because Glenn even talks about it as showing leadership, right? To be able to now have those conversations. So, so yeah, it's a reframe, right? Instead of explaining this as like, you know, exposing weakness or making yourself vulnerable, what do we, you know, say instead? How do we flip it from, you know, this is vulnerability or this is weakness and this is like a bad thing, to saying like, you know, talking about this can be a good thing? What are the benefits of opening up? How do we flip that script? And Mike, you can go ahead and start if you want.
What I've noticed lately, in that I'm more trusted on the jobs I'm on now. I'm not working in oil and gas currently. I'm working in commercial construction as a carpenter, and I try to avoid oil and gas just specifically for the reasons of isolation of the culture around oil and gas and the attitudes towards anything outside of oil and gas that come along with it. But I'm actually better at what I do now than I ever was in oil and gas, and the people I work with recognize it. So when I try to take my time saying my piece, I try to let the other guys run wild with whatever they want to talk about. But when I do say something, I think they listen a little better. Like they listen a little more to me. Because they know I'm good at the job. They can see it. They see me helping lead the job, and they'll actually respect my point of view more because they can see me leading as a worker. And so when I talk to the guys, it honestly, it doesn't center around mental health very much, but when we talk about oil and gas, I try to hone in on the reality of the situation we face in Alberta rather than the hopes and dreams and the nostalgia of what we experienced, because while we all kind of rolled in the money, everything else about it kind of angered us, whether it was the traffic in cities that were built for half of the people that ended up coming here. The lineup for Tim Hortons would drive guys wild, and they would come to work angry. And I mean, for me, the trigger was always debt. In 08, I bought a vehicle. In September 08, in October 08, the global economy crashed, and nobody knew it was going to happen. And so I had this feeling that I was going to lose everything based on having debt. Then in 2014, I bought another vehicle. And in August of 2014, the price of oil started to slide until it cratered. And once again, I was in debt and not knowing what was coming in the future. And both times it would contribute to huge bouts with anxiety that I mostly drank away. And now I think that the guys on the job site know that debt is a problem, and that the massive investment in oil mega projects is not coming to save us. I think it's starting to sink in. It's been 6 years. I'm hoping it's sinking in.
Right.
Mike,
Yeah,
sorry, do you mind? I'm just curious, Mike. I've heard this from a couple guys. It sounds like at what you were talking about was making a decision for yourself, knowing it was better for you to stay out of O&G, and knowing that you have these skills that you can apply in other industries. Mm-hmm. But there's a pay cut involved in making that choice for yourself. Okay. And I've heard anyway, men describe that they're almost kind of bullied in a way. Like, if you have this ticket, why aren't you maximizing the amount of money you can make with it? Have you encountered any of that? And how hard is it to kind of stand up for yourself and justify why you've made this decision that you know is healthier for you?
Mostly by necessity. When I moved to Calgary in 2015, the market had changed dramatically. It was the summer of 2015, and everybody was slowing down. And so the first union work I could find in Calgary was as a first-year carpenter, after being a journeyman scaffolder for almost 10 years in refineries up north and in Edmonton. At $40 an hour, I came down here and made $22 an hour for a year, and I was still in debt. I still had like a $500 a month truck payment, and I had to eat that the whole time. I would end up with like $50 a week left off my check after I had paid the bills, and ultimately now, the people I work with respect it more that I was willing to do that at the age I was willing to do it at, and that I was willing to step away from something I had done for so long and actually learn something new. And I've never, the only thing I've encountered is people that are afraid to go do something new because they're afraid of the pay cut, right? And they think they can't manage on less. Mm-hmm. So they're doubly indebted to oil and gas. They can't see a future without it. If you guys don't mind, I have to grab my power cord because I'm dangerously low here. So.
Do what you gotta do, Mike. I'm actually thinking, Dennis, you may want to speak to that as well in terms of accepting a pay cut to learn something new. Because yeah, social work. What's up, buddy? We accept a pay cut for sure.
I mean, I took a massive pay cut, and when I first was telling people that I was going back to school, the response was kind of, I mean, some positive, some negative. I remember one business owner called me stupid. He said, how could you have the experience you have and have a business and be running all these things, and you're about to get out of all that to go back to be a social worker, taking away people's children? Like, that's stupid. And I said, like, it's more than dollar signs flashing in my eyes now. Like, when somebody tells me about a job, it's about like me being home now all the time, me exercising, spending time with my friends and family, having a dog, It's about my mental health, being able to manage that. It's about, you know, because I had a business, I didn't have benefits. It's about having benefits now. It's changed for me. And, you know, and it's not easy because it is a huge change. Especially I volunteered for the first little bit. So like I wasn't even making money. I was just kind of living off the money that I had saved up over the years. And I had a plan, right? But, you know, it was tough at first. I questioned it for a while, but I also wanted a lifestyle change, a career change. And, you know, and I also want to, like, you know, I want to do other things in life, not just work for the man, essentially. And yeah, I do miss part of the money, but I also don't miss, you know, some of the culture within oil and gas. I don't miss the long hours. And I don't think I'm any less of a man because I work 8 hours today rather than 12 to 14, 16, sometimes 18. Like I feel like I'm the same person. I just, like, I'm not so wore out. I'm wore out from other things, you know, things I actually enjoy, like snowboarding or hiking or, you know, and I did some of that stuff, but a lot of my time was put towards working, you know, long shifts, long hours. You know, camp life was, you know, hotel life, traveling around. And I didn't mind traveling around here and there. I'm not against that whole world, but it just doesn't work for me anymore, you know?
What that brings up for me is that, like, quality of life is about so much more than what you, like, how much you make or how much you earn. And I think, yeah, Mike and Dennis, both your experiences kind of speak to that. Like, quality of life is not just your income. While it can be a significant thing and a stressor when you don't have it, it's like time and, you know, having routines to care for yourself and even pets, right? I love that you brought that up, Dennis. Like, you can't have a dog if you're home 1 week a month and you're not home the rest of the time.
Well, and I have friends that have made this work and they make really good money, and some don't mind doing the 2 weeks in and 2 weeks out or whatever. And, you know, they try to set it up for that they're successful and take care of themselves and self-care and all that stuff. I just found over the years that it's not for me anymore. I'm not against it. And, you know, when I hear their struggles, it's usually the same struggles that I had when I was in it. And they'd like to be home more, be around their kids more, or be involved in certain things. And I realize that some are in it, and debt is a big thing. If you own a house, a vehicle, a family, or whatever, like, how are you paying the bills? So I'm not against it, but, like, I know that, you know, for me, it's not working anymore. It hasn't worked for a while. So.
Yeah, I actually, on that note, have a very related question, and I think it will probably be our last one before we switch it over to audience questions. But I like this question, and I think you'll probably all have something to say about it. So we've talked a lot, and, you know, we talked about it in the film, we talked about it now, about kind of workplace cultures, cultural messages that we give to men as well, outside of workplaces, but just generally those broad cultural messages. So we've got some key ones to focus it on. So we teach men often, you know, rugged individualism. This is the way, you know, you're going to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You're going to, you know, earn your own income, whatever. You're going to be tough. You're going to work really hard. You're not going to complain about anything. And this is kind of your route to success. But I definitely want to unpack these a little bit and talk about who they're serving and how, I guess. So to start us off, how would you say these kind of norms or messages serve men or workers? And it can be, you know, broadly, like, yes, there's pros, maybe there's cons. So I don't know, Mike or Dennis, maybe one of you wants to start that one. I know it's a big question.
I think a lot of people force themselves to tough it out because that's the expectation that we're raised with. The most, if I think about it, the most important long-term male influence in my life is a very quiet man that everybody respects. He made millions of dollars in Fort McMurray and retired at 48. He's doing the same thing that I've done. So if anything, take a lot of my demeanor from him. Really rational. And I don't let a lot of people in on it. But the idea that we're still supposed to be those kinds of guys, it's hitting a point, and you're always going to have young people come up and get into the trades that buy into it. I've seen it like in the last year where I had to like explain history to some guys, to explain history and economics to some guys, just to get them to see a different point of view that they hadn't been exposed to, because the nature of the world we live in now is it's a canyon of echoes. We hear the same thing because we're surrounded by similar voices all the time, and these guys are constantly, they're either grouchy or they're so stoked to be doing anything that they want you to be as wound up as they are, and let's get her done, let's go, let's send it, boys. But they're not, there's such a drop off in the moods. You're either ready to give her or not doing anything at all. And we push guys to always be ready to give her. And if they're not, we don't ask why they're maybe not in the mood for it. I know I don't. Even lately, while I've been, kind of leading on this job, I kind of have expectations of the guys around me to keep up, like think this through in advance and know what's coming. And if they're not, I start barking a little, which is really rare for me, but I've had to lately. And then I stand there because I understand perception, and I understand reputation, and I understand emotion. I think to myself, okay, how did that, is that the way to motivate that guy? Am I taking into account that guy is maybe having some issues? And then I have to go back and I'll actually do it. I will talk to the guys about like, how you doing, man? Because like I got one buddy who's getting divorced like in the last 3 weeks, and I've seen other guys go down the hole with drugs and booze. And I was pretty close. Like when you met me, Veronica, I was working in the bar to avoid going to the bar. And that was my last year in Edmonton. And I wasn't a happy guy, right? I was pretty surly at the time. And I don't know if you recall.
You're always nice to me, so that's what matters.
No,
just kidding.
But I was pretty surly that year, and it was because I was drinking a lot, and I needed to get out of that. I needed to get out of that environment. And I don't know if trying to be more rugged than everybody else is the way forward, because I see these little actions on the job where guys are trying to one up each other in as far as doing manly things, and I'm just like, and I can't help it. I just shrug it off and shake my head.
Mike, would you think it's fair to say that one of the things that I'm always impressed by, I'm so impressed by Dr. Dan Bilsker in many ways, but whenever I see the documentary, I always like that moment where he characterizes how some of the stereotypes of masculinity can be actually very positive. Like he acknowledges how good it can feel to provide, for example. So when Veronica's asking about, how do these sort of narratives serve us? Like I just think that's so important, right? Instead of constantly positioning masculinity as being this negative force like to just take a minute and appreciate that, okay, yeah, like, I mean, even for somebody like me who's not in the trades, like when I when I book a commercial or something as a producer or director, and I know that we're gonna, you know, maybe bring in a little bit more money than usual, like, man, of course that's a good feeling, and not because I'm thinking about what I can spend it on personally, but because I feel like I'm affording like a better lifestyle for my family. So acknowledging that feeling is real, and not sort of deriding that particular, but accepting and appreciating that if you know, you're constantly trying to sort of serve that, and always trying to like build and level up and whatever, and and you're not taking care of yourself, that kind of exhaustion is real too. Yeah, exactly. Like Roger's saying, celebrate your successes, but also appreciate that that's not where you have to be 100% of the time. Yeah, I mean, that's just like Akash was talking about people being complex earlier, right? And that being tied to, I mean, we always try and break it down into one thing. And it's just, it's so much more complicated than that. Like, more than one thing can be true, right? You as a man can appreciate how good it feels to take care of, how good it feels to work hard, how good it feels to take care of people. But you need to also be able to hold that's maybe not a level that you can exist at 100% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And especially if we define ourselves entirely by our work. Is that going to serve us well, for example, in retirement? You know, hopefully we make it there, and like we retire. I know I'm going to be working till I'm like 75, but here we are. Like, we can't fully define ourselves entirely by certain things, like our ability to provide, or like our job and our job title. And then also acknowledging, like you said, Dylan, like there are so many good things that we can take from, like, yes, wanting to like work hard, you know, be able to provide for others, be good at what we do. Those are good things. They're also not exclusively for men, right? And so broadening the conversation to, I guess, what kind of people do we want to be, and how do we pass on the good to those around us, and sort of question the things that might not be serving us so well. And that was kind of where I wanted to go with the question, because I'm also curious, like, well, should I ask? I feel like we should get to the audience, because actually someone asked a very similar question to what I'm about to ask. So they framed it lovely though. So I'm going to go to the audience questions I have here now. So someone asked, and it's super similar to what I was about to say. As the film highlights, it seems like a large part of the problem is the value of productivity above all else by large oil companies. I could understand why there might be some fear about speaking out at work due to this pervasive toxicity. I'd like to ask the panelists if they have any thoughts about strategies to work towards shifting policies and practices within the oil industry. And I don't know, I mean, Dennis, I feel like you might be able to say something. Dylan, you can start.
I just need to say the biggest takeaway for me, well, one of the biggest takeaways for me making this documentary, is that I just feel like any kind of conversation we have about mental health is just lip service until we fundamentally engage with a very direct existential conversation about the role of work generally, like not just in oil and gas. I mean, I feel like I could have made this documentary about nurses, you know, like there's the level of toxicity and the stories you hear about how nurses are treated the same kind of shift work, and always feeling like, you know, you can't show your emotions. What can you imagine a more like a job that involves more emotional labor, and where it's still, you know, there's this culture of not being able to talk about your feelings. Like, it's not just O&G, it's just how we think about work generally. We need to seriously, we need to get to a place where we can prioritize other things. And like V and I have had conversations over the last year. You know, we thought the pandemic was going to be more of an opportunity to have those conversations, but it's, you know, and you can't blame people, because it's just such a fundamental part of people's identities. And, you know, the pandemic has kind of showed us that if they can't work, then they have a hard time maybe knowing what to do with themselves. And that's nobody's fault. I mean, that's just how we've been conditioned yeah. I mean, I'm the same way. I'm totally the same way. It's something that I have to constantly check in with, because the way that I make money is also very tied to this art form that I love. So it's complicated, but it's not just about like, okay, well, how do we how do we remind these oil and gas companies that they need to value people's lives more than the bottom line? It's not just these greedy corporations. It's just, I mean, it drives a lot of it. They take advantage of the way that our culture is set up, But I think we need to fundamentally address that culture.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you mentioned that it's bigger. It's bigger than one industry, because I mean, yeah, in the way that I sort of framed the question for myself prior to this was like, what are these cultural messages saying about how we value people, right? And generally, it doesn't always come down to like, oh, we want people to have like great, meaningful, full lives. It's like profit or like whatever, and that's discouraging, and that's such a like bigger shift that needs to happen. It just makes me think of things like Canada. Actually, like we have some of the worst like time off kind of rules of like any country. Like in France, they get 6 weeks paid time off for anyone who's a full-time employee. And I'm just like, imagine how different your life would be if you got 6 weeks paid a year.
Yeah, or like most companies have like what, one bereavement day per year or something, right? Like
like that's just wildly out of step with like how we exist in the world as people and how we grieve. Like even 3 days for someone's, like a significant person in your life died, you get 3 days off work. I'm like, that's wild to me. Anyway, before I yell at everything, I'm actually curious if for the original question, just talking a little bit about workplace things, if Akash, from your experience, you have, you're working with organizations that want to incorporate mental health, policies and stuff in a more positive way. So what kind of things have you seen?
Yeah, definitely. I think the workplace is incredibly important. I mean, like stats show that 60% of our waking hours are spent at work, right? So it's not a tiny amount of time we spend there on average, and it's something that it's the right thing to do for companies, right? I think what I'm finding is that I think there's a lot of corporations and companies that are wanting to become involved and do things, but I think there's still a lot of, I would call it stigma, but I would also call it, there's a lot of risk mitigation going on with a lot of pieces, right? So, I mean, I'll be very frank. I think that everyone's super okay talking about depression and anxiety because those are the common ones. But people are still super, super afraid to talk about suicide, right? So it's that like picking and choosing that goes on. And I feel like, I hope that with COVID and some of the other pieces, that stigma kind of reduces. But it's a lot of that. People are afraid, but they do want to do things. Is what I'm finding, and they don't want to necessarily go all in. I think with the workplace, though, I think what's important to recognize is that, and I think companies are starting to recognize is it doesn't just, you're not in a silo when you're at work, right? And I think this going back to Mike's point as well with like asking someone, how are things going at home? Like, it doesn't end in the workplace. So it's your personal life and your work life that's in a combination there, right? So taking into consideration that if someone is going through a divorce or just had a bad, rough morning because they couldn't drop off their kids on time or whatever that may be, like to recognize that it goes coincide and it goes well with the workplace. So it's all combination of it. And I think eventually, and it's really difficult to do on a company by company basis until you bring in tons of consultants to do all the financial work. But I think there is a business case to be made where if that's what the company is looking for, where you are increasing productivity when you have individuals who don't have those distractions, right? You're not thinking about all those other pieces. And like what was mentioned earlier, I think it was Dennis mentioned that, and is kind of those other pieces with the leaves as well, right? Those disability leaves. So I feel like, as for advice and things that are sort of starting to work is, yeah, it's nice to talk about it and have those great conversations, but still at the end of the day, it's that business case. It's how is this going to save me dollars? And I feel like we can almost provide that business case too.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Like we were saying earlier, there are studies and numbers that show, and I know you have some because I definitely took them off of your website from the Calgary Center for Suicide Prevention. There are numbers that show, the cost of, one worker's suicide to a company and what that actually costs in numbers, which feels so horrible to say. Because again, I'm like, how do you value the cost of this person's life in numbers? It's so icky, but it's like, if this changes your mind, for a company, if it changes their mind in terms of how they do things, then I guess, right? Like, I guess we'll write it down as this dollar figure.
For sure. I mean, it's, to just go back, I think the dollar figure right now is, in past studies, it's about 1.8 million US dollars per life lost to the economy, right? So that's approximately 2.3 million Canadian dollars for every suicide is what the economy is losing. So you can put a bit of a price tag to it. Sucks, but you can if you need to.
Yeah. Ugh, it's a weird thing. I have another question here. And I guess this is an interesting one. They're asking, I suggest that this film be shared at safety meetings that are held in oil and gas and other industries. How would it be accepted by management in these companies? And I'm not sure if Dylan or Dennis, you've had folks reach out about the documentary and showing it in workplaces, or what that's looked like.
Yeah, I sort of dropped this in the Q&A that we have had a few different companies reach out to us and actually license internal screenings. So I hope that that's indicative of this culture shifting within management. Again, though, maybe it's just reflective of people having the conversation and not actually being willing to make real sacrifices to that sort of focus on productivity and growth. But certainly I feel like the conversations are happening in a way that was that's much more widespread than I anticipated.
Mm-hmm. Dennis, do you have anything to add to that, or?
I know that some have viewed it, or friends that I know that have worked and want to share, but I think that by viewing something like this with the staff, if they don't have the resources or things set up and they watch something like this and the response, because if you don't identify that there's a problem, then you don't have to fix it. But if they do something like this, I know that we had more people than just Husky involved at the start, and it ended up being just Husky that stuck with it, right? That wanted to be part of it. So, I mean, yeah, I'm not blaming them as corporations. I'm sure other ones probably don't want to have this shown because of, it could spark up conversations, and then they might, as employers or management, have to have some type of response or a resource for these kinds of things, right? But also I've done stuff in workplaces where this is exactly what they wanted. They wanted something like this to kind of get the conversation going and having things in place to take care of their workers. So I think there's kind of a mix of different things out there. So.
And that kind of makes sense. That kind of tracks. And like you said, it can be it can be tough to acknowledge that there might be a lot of things that need to change, and then to have to actually be accountable to make those changes. Yeah, it's a lot.
It's just like studies that are done, and then they see the results of the study and they don't want it published because they didn't think it was the way it was, right? Or doing evaluations with employees and finding out that lots are unhappy, then they get the results where they're like, we're not putting that in our monthly newsletter, but we gotta wonder why, everybody's putting a 2 out of 10 as far as, I don't know, feeling taken care of as far as mental health or having resources at our company to use, right? So. Yeah,
which is, again, I guess another call to courage for those companies to be okay with bad results, because that's a clear message, right? That your employees are saying. And if you're willing to put together the survey, you have to be willing to look at the results and have a conversation regardless of how bad it might be, right? No, I appreciate that. Thank you as well for sharing that, Dennis. We are coming to, we're at noon now, so I will probably take a look and see. We've got a couple more questions I think we can get to, but we will try to wrap up relatively soon. So, that question is very sad, but let's do it. So this person asked, watching the film reminded me of men being considered as cannon fodder during wars. It seemed in Alberta that men are now petroleum fodder to produce oil and gas for the world. Can we change things from the bottom up in the industry, or do we need management support at the top? I feel like it's a both, right? It's kind of both. Also, my dog is dreaming, so I apologize if anyone can hear his little barks. I'm just going to mute myself and someone else can take this question.
Oh boy, I mean, I think about this. I think about this all the time. Someone was just talking about this in the chat as well. This sort of war analogy, and I mean, I often wonder. And please, Dennis and Mike, if you think this is an unfair way to characterize it, but I just wonder about oil and gas, especially being offering men. Well, I guess Dr. Belsker sort of presents it this way in the documentary as well, right? Like men taking these jobs that they know are inherently dangerous because it feels good to provide, but it also feels good to sacrifice. And is there an element of wanting to sacrifice since we don't have these sort of traditional wars to go fight? I mean, I feel like the economy is a sort of perpetual, like a perpetual war. Is it fulfilling that desire, that need for men who maybe are looking for a way to feel, to feel a sense of self-worth? It feels very good to sacrifice in this way, engaging in labor that is incredibly arduous, difficult, dangerous, dirty, work that nobody wants to do. I think a lot about that, the war analogy, but also I haven't, I haven't lived that life.
Dennis, Mike?
What I remember most about loss of life in and around the sites, I don't have a lot of experience with suicide. What I did see was drugs, for starters, and drugs and transportation, to be honest. And excuse me, in 2004 and 2005, when things were really heated, and I was working in Fort McMurray, every Thursday would be the Suncor 500 or the Syncrude 500, which was the 2-lane race to get from Fort McMurray to Edmonton. And just for miles, you'd see a string of taillights. And people died on that highway weekly. And the guys on the job at the time would just shrug it off. Oh, they can't drive. What's wrong with those guys? They don't know anything, right? And I think that came to a head in May 2006 when the diversified bus carrying a bunch of people was hit on the highway near Gibbons, and the fact that Highway 63 needed to be twinned as soon as possible really came to broader attention. And I always had this empathetic thing, just this feeling of empathy whenever we would hear somebody died on the weekend on the highway again. And I would take the day off work just because I was like, I couldn't handle the comments about it. And that made me soft, right? But I don't want to be around this, right? And I didn't know how to get out of it, like get out of the cycle of being up there and thinking that was the only job for me because I had a family member who got me the job and I needed to live up to that. And then the other thing that was cannon fodder, as it was put, in 2010, when I was finding my footing as an artist in Edmonton, I was up all night playing and drinking, and up early in the morning to go to work all day. And the guy who was calling me to get me up in the morning so that I could drive him to work too, because we had a drive out to Fort Saskatchewan from Edmonton, Strathcona. He was up all night drinking and doing drugs every night. And I always wondered how he got up so early, but then I realized he was up all night already. And then he'd be up all day, and then he'd be up all night. And part of it with him was the loneliness, because he had been in a bad relationship and had a child that he didn't see, and he had no way to deal with that. But he was always in a good mood because he was always high on drugs. And eventually, a few months into that job, one weekend he didn't show up, or 1 week he didn't show up, and it turned out he had died in a car of an OD that weekend. When a bunch of us were bummed about, obviously, like super distraught about it, and it was a shutdown, so it was go, 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 go. When we told the super that we were taking the day off to go to his funeral, we all like several of us, not the whole crew, but several of us there was a reaction, let's say, kind of a dismissal of his weakness for dying, like, just, it was low key, but that's how it felt to me. Right. And that was probably, and I quit shortly thereafter. And because I quit a job in 2010 when things were slow, it was a long time before I got a union call again, because the union finds out about it, and they find out the company's point of view. They never ask yours. Well, I mean, we're working on it now. Like, I'm pretty tight with some of the organizers and the executive on that with my union. And so we talk about this stuff more now than we did 10 years ago, but that has changed. And I'm glad it has, because our unions are recognizing that guys are in distress. But yeah, those are the two instances of cannon fodder. And I had noticed my buddy Chris's question in the Q&A about having felt like I ever saved a life as far as mental health went. No, but I have felt like I've lost one, because I didn't recognize that my buddy was on drugs all the time until the weekend, until I went into work one day and everyone was like, he's dead.
Oh, Mike, I'm so sorry. Oh, such a heavy story. And I mean, you rightly point out though too, like the knowing signs, knowing how to check, like that, it is so important. And it's hard. We don't get taught these things for the most part, right? So learning them from experience is the hardest, the hardest way to learn. Oh, okay. I feel like we are basically out of time, which is not so good. I did tell these lovely panelists till noon and maybe slightly over, so I do want to hold myself accountable to their time. But any last comments, lessons, or things you'd want folks to come away with from the conversation today? I don't know, Dennis, can we start with you?
I just, I don't know, I like having these conversations. I think continuing with these conversations can be, part of the solution, like I shared in the documentary, right? So for the people attending that, enjoyed the film and can relate to it, and, like all that stuff, I just think that's part of why this is carried on for a while and hopefully continues to carry on, right? And some of the different programs that are coming up now, that I would like to get involved in once things slow down a bit, to be even more part of the solution. So I just appreciate everybody else in the panel, and for you hosting this whole thing, and for the attendees and the people involved about, like, sitting down and taking it all in, because there's a lot, and there's a lot in even our responses, right? There's a lot to unpack, even with the way that we respond to some of the questions. So yeah, thank you.
Totally. Thanks, Dennis. Dylan.
Oof, yeah, I guess I would just echo that. And I feel very, very grateful to be invited to participate in these conversations. I mean, it's good to speak about my experiences in terms of what I learned making the documentary, but it's even better to be able to listen. And so this film continuing to have a bit of a life, having been out for a year and a half, and to have it be this sort of catalyst for conversations like this is exactly the reason why Omar and I made it. So yes, I just feel very, very grateful for the opportunity, and very happy that the film is doing largely what we hoped it would. And hey, Sarge, and just want to thank everybody for for sharing today, and hope everyone's doing well.
Thank you, Dylan. Akash.
Yeah, no, I would echo what's been said already here. I think the couple things that I'll kind of conclude my kind of pieces to take away. I mean, the first one is just everybody who's involved in the film, like, thank you. It's a great film, and I think for me personally, like, I'll be very honest with you, like, I've already watched a couple times, and I wasn't necessarily planning on watching it today's event, but then I stuck around and I watched every minute of it, and I think every time I watch it, it gives me just more things to think about. So thank you to everybody who's involved with that. I think for myself, I think something to kind of leave with is just kind of emphasizing that everybody should be paying attention, right, to your buddies, your friends, your colleagues, and not being afraid to reach out to someone you are worried about, right? So paying attention doesn't necessarily have to mean that the individual has their head in their hands and they look super distressed. It's different behavior changes, right? Behavior changes such as, are they angry? Are they drinking too much? Or are they making fun of suicide and mental health all of a sudden? Because that could also be a behavior change if they never talked about it before. So that's something that I would highly recommend. Reach out to someone, and if you are worried about them, like, just ask them directly, are you thinking about suicide? And if they say yes, don't panic, be supportive. And just to diffuse a myth, I know we talk about some myths, is, I mean, asking someone if they are thinking about suicide does not put the idea in their mind. That is a myth, and it actually may reduce the risk they may attempt. So yeah, that'd be something that I would leave with is, if you're worried about them, ask them.
Thanks. Honestly, such a good lesson to learn, because it can be hard to know, and folks can feel nervous about making a situation worse, right? But if they say yes, like, you probably can't make it worse, like, so they're already at their probably worst point. So yeah, no, I appreciate that as well, Akash. Mike, last things you hope people take away from the film or from today?
I don't think my story is unique. I don't think Dennis's story is unique. I think that's one of the most unfortunate things that we gloss over, and we forget about those years in Alberta and how this industry operated, and how it treated and continues to treat people. Anybody who's worked in the industry or has family who's worked in the industry has heard this stuff, right? Unless you're fully bottled up and won't talk to anybody about anything, everybody knows this stuff existed, and very few people were ever in a position to do anything about it. So if this helps broaden the conversation, if Dylan and Omar's film and Akash's work and Dennis's future work and your work help bring this conversation out into the open, especially among the people I work with, I think it's going to be a huge benefit for Alberta going forward, because we have ignored a lot of things for a lot of years, and that stuff sticks with us, whether we want it to or not. Even when I was thinking about the things I would have to say in responses to questions for today, I had to go back and think of the people I worked with and the responses to their deaths or their problems, and we did not deal with it in a healthy manner. And
Mhm.
as long as we keep dealing with things unhealthily, Alberta's going to suffer.
Mhm. Yup. Oh, I want to be like, on that cheerful note. No, the the reality, I would say, no, it's fine, Mike. I love, and I invited you to speak from your experience. You don't have to disguise things with cheerfulness. That's part of the point of our conversation as well. And this is, it's the reality, right? And I feel like, honestly, we can keep learning more. We can keep flipping scripts, learning how to do that as well. We can probably actually harness a lot of the really great things about, you know, masculinity and the way men are told to be a man, to actually in service of their mental health, or in service of a different kind of, you know, economy. The possibilities are there, and I think it's definitely up to all of us to kind of be part of that positive shift. So okay, thank you. I just want to say thanks to, of course, you know, Dennis, Akash, Mike, and Dylan, and even Omar, who couldn't be here today, but like, just thank you for making the film. Thank you for being part of it. Thanks for being part of the conversation today, and for your ongoing work. Because I do think that things have to change. They can't stay the same. And I think we're all kind of acknowledging there are a lot of people trying to push in the same direction. So I also want to say a huge shout out to Barry for keeping that chat going, for answering folks' questions. Massive shout out to Danica, who handles all the tech things so that I don't have a meltdown, which is lovely. And just that team. I mean, if folks are interested in what people are up to in Medicine Hat, great work happening with Pints with the Pack. Great work happening from Sark. Also just some of the loveliest and funniest people I've ever met. So we will include links in the follow-up email in terms of how you can keep following along with the events from this Unpacking Masculinity speaker series. We do have a feedback form, and we are hoping folks can, you know, take a few minutes to quickly fill it out for us. I dropped the link in the chat. Whoops, no, I didn't. I dropped it to someone else. Woohoo! I dropped it in the chat, but it will be in the follow-up email as well. So please do tell us, you know, how we did. You know, suggestions for future things are great. What you would have liked to see more of, potentially. And then, yeah, next event is March 14th at noon. And we'll be hearing from Dr. Michael Flood, who is an international expert on men and masculinities. The workshop promises to be really interesting. So if you want to keep your learning going, you want to keep engaging in these conversations, that is someone who has a ton of experience, you know, having conversations with men about mental health and also about gender-based violence prevention. So definitely check it out. But yeah, with that, until next time, I guess. Thanks so much, everyone, for coming out. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Thanks, y'all.